this lecture is going to be on touching on the Roaring Twenties kind of consumer society in the 1920s, and then move into the Great Depression. When you talk about the 1920s, oftentimes the decade becomes known as the Roaring Twenties, and there's a lot of reasons why it's known as the Roaring Twenties. It's because of you have life after World War I, and people were over and done with the war and just happy the war was over, and they're basically going to live their life. They're there to basically just enjoy life and live life in a sense. So they're going to party, and they're just going to enjoy life. But there's another aspect to it where you have the 1920s is economy-wise, once you get back from the war, once the war is over, the economy rights itself. And you're talking probably about 21, definitely by 22. The economy is actually good. The economy is actually very strong. And during the 1920s, the decade of the 1920s, 22 to 28-ish, you're going to have an economy that's actually fairly strong, and you're going to actually have manufacturing output increase by 60%, 60%. And so what that means overall in general for the economy was that it's a strong economy. If it's a strong economy, that means that your workers are going to get paid. And if you are getting paid, you're going to have a paycheck, and you feel secure in your job, you feel secure in your pay, so therefore you will buy stuff. And what that means is that the 1920s becomes a consumer society or a consumer culture, meaning people will buy stuff. And that's exactly what will happen. People will buy stuff in the 1920s. And I'm really not exaggerating when I say stuff, because it's everything across the board. They're buying big items like cars, houses, like big ticket items. They're buying what you're going to see, like washing machines are going to be very popular, vacuum cleaners are going to be very popular, and people are buying those things. They're also then buying little stuff. They're buying toys for the kids. They're buying electrical appliances. They're buying pre-made clothing. So in a sense, and they're buying rugs and things for the house because they can. They're buying pearls, faux pearls for the flapper look. They're buying the clothes for the flapper look. They're going to the hairdresser to have their hair done. And they're buying cosmetics. And so the fact is that they're buying large ticket items, as in cars and houses, but they're also buying things that make their life convenient, like washing machines and vacuum cleaners, but they're buying rugs and decorations and pre-made clothing and cosmetics, and all that feeds into an economy and actually provides a very strong economy. And so that's another reason why it's known as the Roaring Twenties, because your economy is actually roaring. Another thing is that in the 1920s or 1919, you're going to have the Volstead Act, and the Volstead Act is the 18th Amendment, and it's going to basically get rid of alcohol. This is something that we've been talking about for decades, and for me talking about lectures is that temperance movement. Well, finally that temperance movement is basically going to make way, and the country is going to get rid of alcohol, and you're going to do that with the 19th Amendment. The 18th Amendment, because the 19th Amendment is the women's right to vote. So the 18th Amendment is going to basically get rid of the manufacture, the sell, and like any type of transportation of manufacturing, sell of alcohol. Now, it does not say that you cannot drink it, because it can't tell you what you can and cannot drink. But the fact is that if you don't make it and produce it, manufacture it, then the idea is it wouldn't be there to consume, technically. But what happens is that alcohol is going to basically go underground. It's going to be on the black market. And if people want their alcohol, they're going to find their alcohol. And one of the ways that you find alcohol is through speakeasies. And speakeasies are clubs that are basically illegal clubs. And they're usually run in like the back of a legitimate business, or like the basement of a legitimate business. You have to go through the alleyway, and you walk into this club, and they're selling alcohol and they're selling food. And if it's a large club, maybe they have a jazz band. But the fact is that people want their alcohol, so they're going to go to these speakeasies, and the fact is they're going to spend money in those speakeasies. Once again, it's about putting money into the economy. If you want to talk about as in a full picture, women are going to dress up. They're going to be in their best flapper look. They'll have their hair done. They'll have their new flapper dress or flapper style dress on, their faux pearls, and they're going to go out, in a sense, clubbing to the speakeasies on the weekends. But the fact is that they're spending money. Either they're spending money on themselves or they're spending money in the speakeasy clubs. And so once again, it's something about putting money into the economy, another reason why it's this roaring 20s. And it's just that people are enjoying life. They're enjoying life to the fullest. Okay, now, moving away from that, okay, but still talking about like labor reform. In 1920, 1 out of 5 workers were female workers. The Department of Labor will create a division called the Women's Bureau. It was there to collect data and lobby for protective laws for women. In some states, the states had passed laws limiting the hours that women could work, like no night work. They had to get like a certain amount of rest, meaning they had to be off a certain amount of time before they went back to work, and also better ventilation at work. And overall, I mean, if you talk about try to get better ventilation, that's a good thing overall for anybody, any worker at that point in time. Okay, now I want to move into the end of the 1920s, and actually I'm going to move into the mid-1920s. 1925, 26-ish, the economy is starting to slow down, okay? And people are not buying cars as they once did. They're not buying houses as they once did. And so those two main industries, which are the two main industries of the United States, are going to basically slow down. And then all other industries that feed into the automobile industry and the construction industry, the glass industry, steel industry, rubber industry, asphalt, wood, electrical, you name it, window companies, they're also going to start to slow down because you have these two major purchases that are also slowing down. So the economy is starting to slow down. Another thing is in the 1920s, farmers were doing really well. They had created some mechanized or more mechanized farming. They had created some ways to actually increase or techniques to increase their harvests. And what happened was in the beginning of the 1920s, the farmers actually started overproducing. And so it's going to catch up with them when you talk about 1925, 1926, that overproduction of farm goods, you have too much farm goods on the market, and that means that the price is going to decrease. And so farmers are not making their profit now in the mid 1925, 26-ish, and that's going to weight down the economy. And so what you're going to do is you're going to start to have these weights in the economy that's basically going to kind of drive down the economy, which is going to slow down the economy. So you have that going on, okay? And that's kind of one of those things that happen. It's not getting better, and it continues to do that through the latter half of the 20s. You also have some very risky investments that have been going on in the 1920s. You have risky investments, and people are getting caught in those risky investments and losing everything, and now they don't have any money, and that also then weights down the economy. So what's now going to happen is as you're moving into 1929, as in like the fall of 29, people are getting very leery about the stock market. Some people are starting to pull out. Things are just questionable. The economy is not strong. And then what's going to happen is you're going to start to have, you're going to have the stock market crash. The stock market crash is October 29, 1929. And that is a Tuesday. And the stock market is going to crash because people are very leery about investments. So they're starting to take their money out. The stock market crashes. People are like, oh my God. And so then they start to make a run on the banks and they start to pull their money out. because they want to know that they have their money. When you pull your money out of the bank, then the bank has no money to do business, and so the bank closes their doors. And so then that's going to be another problem in the economy. You have the run on the banks. Now, another problem is at this point in time in the United States is that your money at a bank, your money is not insured. So let's say, for conversation's sake, 100 people get into the bank, they pull their money out of the bank. Then the bank will say, I don't have any more money left, and so I'm going to close my doors. So the people who are 101 and 102, they go to the bank and the bank's closed and there's no money, and they've basically lost their entire savings because their savings is not insured. Banks do not have to hold all your money. That's not how it works. They only have to hold a certain percentage of it. And the other percentage is going to be out in loans. And so therefore, people have lost everything. So when you have the stock market crash, you're going to have people that lose money because of the stock market crash, because of bad investments or risky investments. You're going to have people that lose money because they've lost money because now everybody took money out of the bank and there's not enough money to go around. And so now you're going to have the United States entering into what's known as the Great Depression. With that, then your businesses are going to fail. If you don't have money, then you're not going to go spend money. And so therefore, you're not going to go buy things. And when you don't buy things, then stores have no customers and stores start to fail. And so they close their doors and then they laid off people. Now you have a high unemployment. High unemployment means people don't have money because they're not working, so they don't put money into the into society or into the economy. And you have this very vicious cycle that in a sense the United States can't get out of at this point in time. So this is really this is a very, very basic explanation of the Great Depression in the United States. But it's the fact that there's like lack of money basically in the economy. Now, as we all know, the United States will go into a Great Depression October 29, 1929, and the United States will not get out of the Depression until 1941. This is basically mid-1941. I would say about summertime of 1941 when the United States comes out of the Great Depression. And one of the things that's going to pull us out of the Great Depression is building up for World War II. Okay, so talked about, just real quick, I guess I should have talked about it when I talked about businesses fail. You have the stock market crash, you have banks fail. 1930 to 1933, you'll have 5,504 banks that will fail. And that's starting in 30. You will also have banks that would have failed between October of 29 and January of 30. So that just kind of gives you an idea, in your head. Okay, marriage and family. Marriages will decrease during the Depression years. People aren't going to get married. It takes money to get married. And also, I mean, you would have to support yourself and potentially you could have kids, and people really can't sign up for that right now. Some women will basically kind of make do if they're already married and in a family, some way, shape, or form. Women will make do to try and make the money last, to kind of stretch meals, just to basically survive. Many women will actually look to welfare to help with their families. Welfare would be around for a very short period of time in the 30s. Then it will can kick up when you get into the New Deal. We'll talk about that in a bit. But some women will look to welfare, but welfare is only going to hold for a very short time because there's not a huge amount of welfare at this point in time in the United States. During the 1930s, more than half of Americans lived on incomes between $500 and $1,500 per year. Obviously, it's definitely a lot less than it would be today, but that's still definitely not a lot of money. They are definitely obviously going to purchase less. They're going to make things themselves. They're going to mend things, darn socks, try and trade things, clothing, food, that type of thing. They find ways to make do. Entertainment was basic entertainment. It was reading books. It was playing games at home. It was made up games for the kids. If you still had electricity, you could listen to radio, and radio had radio programs, so that would be a form of entertainment. But there was definitely a focus on family and basically survival of the family. Divorces also decreased just for the fact that you have to have money to get a divorce, and so people once again would make do, and not get that divorce until definitely later, just because of the money. Obviously, births will also decrease. It definitely takes money to raise a child, and some people definitely can't afford to do that. Okay, I'm just going to give you a very quick example. Okay, prices in northern cities. This is basically in the north. Milk was about 10 cents a quart. Butter was about 23 cents a pound. A loaf of bread was about 7 cents. And ground beef was about 12 cents per pound. Crazy numbers, crazy prices. When you talk about the Young Women's Christian Association, really transformed into a welfare agency, trying to provide food and shelter as much as they could, also providing clothing and medical care for poor women. The food is only going to last for so long. The shelter would definitely be there. Clothing could be there if they're kind of getting donations. Medical care, I would say, would be there. It does definitely be a little bit of hit and miss on supplies. The food will eventually run out. They'll be there in the beginning, but it's going to be hard to get the food kind of towards the end, or as the years go on. I guess that's the best way to say it. As I mentioned earlier in this lecture, farmers are going to be hard hit. Farmers were already hard hit 1925, 1926-ish, and now farm prices are actually going to go down even more. So farmers are going to be hard hit. Prices for their farm products will be extremely low. They were low, starting to be low in the mid-1920s, and they will go even lower. When you talk about the loss of profit for farmers, they will basically go down by over 60% when you're talking about 1930s, early 1930s. Okay, now another thing that is going on, it does not cause the Depression because it begins in 1930, but it's just one more thing that's going to make life difficult, and that is what's known as the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl is going to occur between 1930 and 1940. It's actually a decade, which is crazy. What's going to happen is that there's going to be a severe long drought in the Midwestern states, basically kind of like the Plain States, basically like northern Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and then up into, or then if you move north into the Dakotas, meaning South and North Dakota. And what's happening is that there's a drought, and you're just not getting the rainfall that they once did, and actually you're getting years that you'll have very severe lack of rain. I mean, they're probably getting like 3 inches of rain, which is crazy for them. It's not a huge amount of rain, but definitely not like 3 inches. That would be like Death Valley type of rain. And so you will have farms that will just absolutely dry up. And when you have farms that will dry up, all your plants, right, all your harvests are going to dry up, and then you're just left with dirt. Okay, so what happens is in these states, they are very flat states, and you'll have winds that come and they will pick up, and the winds are already there. It can be a very windy place or a very windy region. But if you don't have the plants to hold the soil down, then the winds come and they just pick up the soil. And the soil is just going to basically create these huge like dust clouds. And that's why it's known as the Dust Bowl. I have a slide or slides, plural, on the Dust Bowl. And anyway, so these winds come up, they pick up all the dirt and all the dust, and you have these huge like clouds of dust. And what would happen is when you have these winds that come through and it kicks up all the dust and you have these dust clouds, eyewitnesses and people who lived through it will say that it sounded like a freight train coming through their community. And they said it would go from daylight to actual darkness because you would have these huge clouds that would basically block the sun. And you would have these dust clouds that would come through your community, and everybody would basically run for shelter so they wouldn't be caught up in the dust. But we know that homes are not perfect, especially back then. You have like little cracks and crevices everywhere. And even when they're in a house, your house would just have like kind of like this fine level of like silt and kind of like this fine level, if I can speak, of dust through the house. Mothers, one of the first things that the mothers would do is that they would take kind of like handkerchiefs or kind of like tea towels, and they would wet them, and they would put them over their baby or child's face to prevent them from breathing in the dust. So definitely very challenging times at this point in time. So these people who are living through the Dust Bowl and that region, to say that they were desperately poor is probably an understatement. People would they would do all different things. Some people moved away. Some people would try and make do. They would try and like live with family or friends to kind of get them through if their farm was gone. They would try and pick up a little bit of work. It's really hard to pick up work because they're in a depression. They would try and stretch out the meager food that they had. So very, very challenging. Another thing that when you talk about the Dust Bowl and some people move away, you have these terms like Okies and Arkies, and probably the most popular one would be Okies. There tended to be a group of farmers from Oklahoma, and they will actually travel to California because they hear about the farming in California, and they're like, okay, well, I'll farm in California. So they will pack up everything, move the family to California, drive to California. They're not going to farm because the people who are already in California are farming. So the Okies, and they become known as Okies because they're from Oklahoma, they become agricultural workers, and they are basically picking the harvests in California, and they're going to make extremely small wages. But I guess it's having a small wage versus actually having nothing. And so you'll have Okies that are in California as migrant workers in California, and they will definitely live a life of poverty. I also said Arkies. You'll also have people from Arkansas. You'll have a group of them that will also come into California. Once again, they'll do agricultural work. Sometimes every once in a while, you'll see an Okie and an Arkie pick up another type of labor job, as in working in a factory, working for a company. I would not say that is the norm, but every once in a while it definitely does happen. Okay, just overall, this definitely has to do with the Dust Bowl if you're trying to make ends meet, but it's basically about women making ends meet during the Depression years. Women would work for other people, meaning for better off or wealthy people. They would do sewing, they would do laundry, they would do cleaning. They would it might not be that a wealthy family would have somebody do sewing like every single day, but hire a woman to come in maybe like every couple of months and do some mending. Or you might have a woman come in maybe like once a month or maybe once a week and do the laundry. And so that was a way that women could kind of pick up jobs here and there. Another thing that women would do would rent out rooms in their house. And it kind of like helps everyone out, because if you're like a single person and you can't afford an apartment anymore, but you can afford a room, then a woman usually comes up with the idea that she's going to move all the kids into the dining room, and then she rents out the bedrooms. That brings in a little income for that family, and then the person who's renting out a room has a room, and he can afford a room, but maybe not an apartment. So women definitely got creative at that point in time. Okay, now 1932 is going to be probably about the worst year of the Depression. The numbers are extremely high. Unemployment on an average is 25% unemployed. That's an average nationwide. And it's an election year, and you have Hoover, President Hoover, who is trying to get reelected in the midst of all of this. And he's going to go up against, and I should say Hoover is a Republican, and he's going to go up against a man by the name of Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt is a Democrat. And so Franklin Roosevelt is going to win the 1932 election. He will take office in 1933. And when he comes into office, he's going to put forth his New Deal programs. He's going to put forth his New Deal programs to try to basically jumpstart the economy and get the economy moving once again. Now, I'm going to focus more time on the New Deal, but I just kind of wanted to introduce it and kind of talk a little bit about kind of other groups of people during the Depression. 1930, 22% of the workers were female. And by 1930, women would basically take whatever jobs that they could find. And this is the thing about workers, okay? You have, what did I say? I had 22% of the workers were women. We know that women get paid less than men, okay? But the idea, societal idea, is that if anybody should be working, it should be the men, okay? So when people get laid off, it all depends on the worker. For the most part, and I would say majority of the workers would automatically lay off women, right? Thinking that men should be the breadwinner. Every once in a while, you'll see a worker or a company think about it and say, well, wait a minute, I'm paying the woman less money to do the same work. And every once in a while, a woman would actually be able to keep her job because she's actually getting paid less, okay? So when you talk about women being laid off from their jobs, I would say, yes, that tends to be the trend, and the majority of it would basically fire women before they fired a man. But it wasn't 100%. Every once in a while, you'll have an exception to the rule, and you'll see a company that will actually keep women. During the 1930s, women were earning approximately $525 in the 1930s. Whereas a man would earn about $1,027. This is per year, okay? So in the 1930s, women were earning about $525,000, or I'm sorry, $525,000. Let me start all over again. Okay, $525 per year, okay? A man would work doing the same job, would earn about $1,027 per year. That is 51% less that a woman is making. Okay. Now, Hispanic communities. Majority of Hispanics are working labor jobs. Okay, and that's what they will continue to do, and they will continue to do it in very low wages. Okay. Now, having said that, in California during the Depression years, the state of California will round up Hispanics and basically ship them to Mexico. And the argument is that we can't afford to take care of Americans and foreigners, and so they'll basically round them up and take them back to Mexico. The problem with that is they did not ask for ID, they did not ask for identification, and the problem is that 2/3 of the Hispanics they were sending into Mexico were actually U.S. citizens. And so now you have Americans, Hispanic Americans that are in Mexico that basically say, now I have to figure out a way to get back to California. Meanwhile, the Okies are going to come in and basically take their jobs. So definitely challenging times. African Americans, definitely going to be hard hit with unemployment. Their unemployment rate is extremely high. I have seen numbers about 50%. Of the African American community being unemployed during this time. Okay, another issue is the right to work issue. As I mentioned, 1932, your unemployment rate is 25%. That's average overall across the country. Many people opposed women working. They basically said if anybody should be working, it should be men. And they also said that, children would be better off if women were at home. They've been saying that for a while. You're going to have, this is under Roosevelt, you're going to have the Economy Act of 1933, and it basically said 2 members of the same family could not hold a government job, and those that left were usually women. Okay, and so this was one way to kind of spread out the jobs. This is government jobs, okay? This is not necessarily telling an employer of a private business what to do. But you will see women being laid off in that sense, okay? Many states and local governments refuse to hire married women, thinking that the husband basically had the job and should be the breadwinner. When you talk about professional women, women are definitely going to be pushed out of professions. Professional women are definitely going to lose their jobs, especially like when you talk about teachers. Male teachers will definitely push out female teachers, and there's a preference to have male teachers over female teachers. Also, the people will lose their jobs, or women will lose their jobs in medicine, law, science, teaching. And you definitely see them basically focusing on men in the professional jobs. Okay, I'm going to end the lecture on this, and I'm going to pick up on my next lecture and really focus on the New Deal.